The VO Meter, measuring your voiceover progress. Whether you're a veteran voice actor, just starting out, or don't even know how to set a level, we're here to help you avoid the pitfalls along your voiceover path to success. The VO Meter is brought to you by Global Voice Acting Academy, JMC Demos, Voice Actor Websites, Bodalgo, Roswell Pro Audio, and Vocal Booth to Go. The VO Meter is produced in part using Source Connect, made by Source-Elements.com. And now, your hosts, Paul Stefano and Sean Daly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 120 of the VO Meter.
Measuring your voiceover progress.
This episode, we're interviewing longtime friend and fan of the podcast, Jim Edgar. But before that, it's time for our VO Meter reference levels.
VoiceOver Extra brings you the VO Meter reference levels. Seriously, guys, that's the best you could come up with? Hey, it's your show.
So, I'll start because you've done a lot of talking already, which is fine. I've got a shit ton going on, and it's a good word to the wise to be cautious what you wish for. So, in the summer, I had nothing going on. Like, it was completely dead. No sports. My biggest sporting gig was canceled because the league stopped doing lacrosse. So I was twiddling my thumbs for a while. That's not entirely true. We did actually a lot of family travel, which is cool. So I got away from VO for a while, and it was kind of scary because I really had nothing on the books. So I started auditioning like crazy for audiobooks. And then within like a week, I suddenly had 6 to do. So now I'm booked with audiobooks until March of next year. And I'm way behind, and I'm trying to do as much catch up as I can. So it was kind of refreshing in a way that I could still book stuff, but also a reminder that kind of it is just a numbers game sometimes. So if you're feeling down, you're not booking stuff, get out there, audition more. And chances are, if you don't suck, you'll start booking stuff again relatively quickly and feel better about yourself. But
It's good that you bring that up, too, because, I mean, end of summer, like September stuff, like the number of auditions can certainly dry up just because of the seasonal nature of these things. But it gets you creative. Maybe you reach out to some longtime clients you haven't heard from, or you try and find some other platforms for finding auditions that you haven't tried before.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I did do that. The one book I'm doing is a really long royalty share book, and I just finished another royalty share book. So actually it was 7 that I booked over the summer. And the one that I just finished and is out now, please go buy, is called Losing Hope. So go check that one out, and I will get some royalties from it, hopefully. It was one of these ones that had like hundreds of reviews. That's why I went out and sought it, because I don't usually do royalty share anymore. But I thought, hey, this one is popular. Let's see if I can get some sales out of it. So that was good. So I did look elsewhere. And then going into the new year, now that we're recording this, I shouldn't say new year, new sporting year or school year, because I work for a lot of universities, I am ramping back up with sports. So as soon as we get done here, I'm headed down to Annapolis to the U.S. Naval Academy for the Army-Navy volleyball game. It kind of reminds me of Despicable Me, because if you know sports, the Army-Navy football game is one of the biggest rivalries every year. It actually has its own weekend at the end of the football season for college, where it's the only game, because they want to celebrate it so much. Usually the president goes and attends. So this is Army-Navy volleyball. So it's like that scene with Despicable Me where he's like, we stole the Eiffel Tower, the small one in Vegas. The Empire State Building, also Vegas. So it's like Army-Navy volleyball. But it's still usually our biggest crowd of the year, and I'm pretty excited for that. So those are the things going on in my world. How about you?
Well, let's see. Like I said, auditions were slowing down, but I still got my regular jobs from some of my international clients, and that's kind of a mix of commercial and e-learning and corporate narration. I actually got asked to host a webinar on audiobooks with one of our first members, actually. So the very talented Juilliard-trained actress Eunice Wong actually led a workshop with us, a webinar called Bringing Books to Life, an Introduction to Audiobooks. So it was really cool to see one of our members like achieve such levels of success. It was really, it was a very full circle moment. And it's not often when I host for one of those things that I can be like, I knew her when, so that was a lot of fun.
I know Eunice, that's cool.
Yeah, she's great. She's a wonderful talent. She did a great job. Let's see. Other than that, It's been really busy with GVA stuff. I just led a workout today where I got to host 10 lovely, talented participants. And those always put a big smile on my face because I get to talk about acting, craft, and improving performances and see it everyone improve in real time. So that's a lot of fun. Other than that, I got a couple of new clients. I've been working on these sort of short form animes, which have been a lot of fun. One of them is kind of more of a motion comic, and then the other one's like a short, like an actual like 7-minute anime. It's really cool to be part of this trend of like new mobile friendly anime content, I guess.
Very cool. Something else we should mention is, and I'm going to get into 2 new sponsors we have, but we are pleased to announce we have 2 new sponsors. Well, one is new, one is returning. So let's first talk about Bidalgo, the online casting site in Germany, hosted by our friend Armin Hirschstetter, the founder and CEO. So Bidalgo is now brought on as a sponsor of the VO Meter, and we're so happy to have them. I've actually been chasing Armin for this for a long time. And I don't think he was like, he wasn't, how do I put this? He never really said he didn't want to do it. He just kind of thought it wasn't the right time. And maybe now, after almost 10 years of doing this, either we wore him down or he got lazy. But either way, I'm glad he said yes, and we're happy to have Bidalgo on board.
Maybe column A, column B kind of thing.
Could be.
But I mean, as Armin knows, we are staunch supporters of his site. It's probably the only pay-to-play that I've kept for as long as I have, almost since I started over a decade ago. So it's just the one that I believe in the most. I like the way it's run. And I find that the type of work there is fitting my voice a lot. Like Germans love David Hasselhoff. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I don't book a lot there, but I've always been a big fan as well. I was looking at my profile the other day, and it did say 10-year member, so that was kind of cool to see a decade-long member of Bidalgo.
Nuts.
Mostly my kids book there. I think I've mentioned on the show before, several times my kids have brought me along as a contributor on a job they already booked with Bidalgo, and they said, hey, we need
I was
a
going to say,
dad.
it's got to be a very small kids talent pool on that one.
I think so. And I think I've mentioned this before, but if your child is under 18, it's a free profile that Armin provides. And so you can have your child make money and pay nothing to Bidalgo just for the privilege of having that profile. So that's pretty cool. And the last thing I want to mention, I think we talked about it in the episode with Karin and Jamie. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back. It's our previous episode, 119. We called it the Quadcast with the hosts of the VO Breakfast Show, Karin Gilfrey and Jamie Muffett. And I listened to it twice now just because it was so fun. Just as a listener, on a couple of drives I put it on, and I feel kind of vain listening to myself, but I pretend I'm only listening to you, Sean, and Jamie and Karin. And it's just hilarious.
Very considerate.
I think that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I'll have to listen to it.
But anyway, we talked about the One Voice conference on there, and I had been there and presented since our last solo episode, so I should talk about that. It was a great time. I thanked J. Michael Collins and the Gravy for the Brain team for having me. And I was on a panel with the keynote speaker, Bill Larson, the voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, talking about live sports announcing. And I also did a workshop where I taught live sports announcing in the big room. I actually closed down the conference. I had the last presentation in the big conference room before the closing ceremonies. So that was kind of cool. And we got some good participants, and I think it was a lot of fun. And as far as the conference in general, as always, a good time. I really tried to just kind of do my presentations and just sort of hang out. I went to a couple of sessions, and I did get some tidbits, but more than anything, I was just hanging out with my friends. So shout out to Christy Bowen, Tom Deere, Paul Cartwright. Those three and Terry Daniel, those 4 I probably spent the most time with. Old friends.
Oh, that's
from the
right.
video
Terry
industry.
was there this year.
Yeah, Terry showed up, didn't get kicked out, which is good. And had some great content, I thought. I actually sat in on his presentation and really liked what he had to say because it really coalesced with some of the same things I do, mostly targeting locally to small businesses, how to send an introductory email or phone call, get leads, and build up your database of contacts and leads for jobs. And that really crystallized a lot of the stuff I also do. So shout out to Terry for a great presentation.
Yeah, his whole philosophy on like the warm call, like well-researched, kind of multiple brush strokes, it's really effective.
Yeah, it's kind of the cornerstone of old school sales training, which is fine because that's what I learned as well. And I do the exact same thing. It does work. All right, so that's all I have to say.
I'm jealous. I kind of missed. I mean, I had some other plans during when One Voice happened, but I definitely love to make it to to the next conference, be it VO Atlanta or One Voice. And for people who feel like they would like to present at an upcoming conference, I believe the submissions for VO Atlanta are available until the 26th.
Yeah, so we're recording this on the 19th. So hopefully I'll get this done before those close, and you'll be able to submit.
Indeed. All right. And one other cool thing about Global Voice Acting Academy, I'm super excited about this, guys. 2 words. Rob frickin' Paulsen. We're going to be working with him on October 23rd for an Acting is Acting webinar. So this is, again, going to be kind of a webinar, more of a lecture thing. But you get to see Rob frickin' Paulsen with all of his narfs and his, like, give me a breaks and, like, hello, nurse, and all that stuff. I'm just so happy that he decided to partner with us, and I cannot wait.
That's going to be awesome. I'll have to check that out. All right, so that wraps up our VO meter reference levels. We'll get to our interview with Jim Edgar right after these really robust
questionable gear purchase.
So first of all, I completely got rid of my booth over the summer. Some of you may have seen it on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And the reason is because we have a returning sponsor, and I'm proud to welcome back to the fold Vocal Booth to Go. Yay! Woo! So I paid for the booth, but I have a Vocal Booth to Go SPB 33 double walled, which stands for Soundproofer Booth. 33 stands for the 3x3, and it's the double walled with 2 layers of mass loaded vinyl. I'm in here now, and I'm just thrilled for a number of reasons. One, because they're still a local company. They're based in the state of Maryland. And I've been out to their facilities multiple times. You've probably seen my videos doing reviews and testimonials. Really like the owner, Jeff. I had a problem with it where the door was kind of sticking because they actually came and set it up for me, which was great because they are local,
Crazy.
only about 45 minutes away. So even though it is meant to be portable, and I have broken them down several times, they actually sent their staff over to do it for me, which is even better. And I had a little bit of a problem with the door, and Jeff came out himself and attached a latch to it to help me attach it easier. And that's just the benefit of working with a local business. So thanks so much to Vocal Booth to Go. And the other reason I really love it, and it's weird because I have more room than I had before in my old booth, which was a Studio Bricks, because as you know, Sean, it has the frame that supports the blankets, and in this case, the mass loaded vinyl. And I've mounted everything I have onto those pipes. Those mine is aluminum.
Onto the frame. Okay.
Yeah, onto the frame. So I have a monitor, 20-inch monitor, hanging in front of me from straps connected to the frame. And they actually sell these at Vocal Booth to Go if you want. You can actually just attach the straps to the Visa mount on the back of any monitor, and it just hangs there. And then I have this gooseneck arm. I forget the brand. It doesn't really matter. I got it from Amazon. That holds my tablet, which is another questionable gear purchase coming up. But that's just under the monitor. It's right in front of me. And the boom arm with the microphone is hanging from the frame. So I have all this room in front of me where I used to have a desk that had the computer monitor and my keyboard on it, and I would always kick it and bang my knees into it. Now I have enough room that I can almost stretch out my entire leg, and I'm 6 feet tall. So I just have a slight bend in my, you probably see me or hear me backing off the mic. I have just a slight bend in my leg, like as if I was doing the end of a leg extension, a leg press. And I can move around, kick, swing my arms. I had none of this room before in a technically bigger booth because this is only 3 by 3 feet. But because everything's off the floor, it's like a whole new world, and it's really fantastic. So really loving the booth. How does it sound?
Sounds great to me.
Yeah, there's really, well, I was just looking for affirmation. I didn't really want your opinion.
Wow, Paul, you sound fantastic.
But I am really impressed. It took me a little while to get mic position right and figure out how to make it sound good. Although I didn't do much. Like I have no bass traps in here. Another benefit of this booth, and I said this way back when I rented one. There's no treatment in here other than the blankets. No bass traps, no foam, no panels, nothing except the blankets. And I've always been able to do that in the Vocal Booth to Go product. So kudos to them for getting the acoustics right from the beginning. And as long as you have either a quiet enough space or you get the double walled like me, you should be good to go with just the provided blankets.
Like, I mean, the Studio Bricks sound nice, but I understand what people say when it's like a little boxy. It sounds a little, your current environment sounds more open, it sounds like you have more space.
Well, yeah, I do. And I needed a ton of work into the Studio Bricks. My opinion is they all do. almost every booth, except for Vocal Booth to Go, needs a ton of work to get it
Additional
acoustically.
treatment.
Yes, additional treatment. Studio Bricks, I've had a Whisper Room, I've had a Drum Perfect booth, I've had a Clear Sonic booth. Oh, I forgot to mention that. In between all this, I had like 3 other booths in here. I tried out a Clear Sonic
Tried all
booth.
the major brands.
Pretty much, yeah. The Clear Sonic booth was pretty good. The only difference was it was not as stable. So it's basically a series of gobos or go-betweens that are set up in the shape of whatever you want. And in my case, it kept falling down. Every time I opened the door, the roof would fall off. And so that was kind of a pain in the neck. Same thing I remember having the Drum Perfect booth all those years ago. It's basically just a door cut out of the felt and platform frame that they have. So every time I opened it, it would shift. And being OCD or just worried about the sound, I would freak out. So the greatest thing...
Oh, yeah, for audiobooks, that would drive me crazy.
Yeah. So the great thing about the Vocal Booth to Go, again, is that it's this hard metal frame. So the door opens, it stays still, and nothing moves. So I'm pretty happy. One other thing I should mention, once I got in here, I realized that since I had more room and everything was farther away, I couldn't see. So I got rid of my iPad. I had a regular iPad, 9.7 inch. The iPad, I think it was the 9th generation, but it was too small for me to see with my aging eyes. So I just recently, 2 weeks ago, got a Samsung Galaxy Tab FE, which stands for Fan Edition 7. It's 12.7 inches, so it's kind of like the iPad Pro, but I found it a little bit cheaper, which is honestly why I went with it. And it does everything I need. It's huge. It's telling me right now that we have a recording for the VO meter, which I already knew. And I'm able to see without using other glasses. So that's helpful. I couldn't really blow it up big enough on the iPad without having to scroll side to side, which kind of sucks when you're reading a script. Like, it's not a big deal to scroll vertically, but in my opinion, scrolling side to side just doesn't work. So the Samsung Galaxy Tab SE7 does all I need in that realm. So those are my questionable gear purchases. I understand you might have done some stupid things too.
A little bit. It's been a while. And then I've also, like, you guys knew what's coming. It built, and then finally my resolve shattered. But I was going to say, like, I mean, I have an 11-inch iPad Pro, and even that one I'm starting to feel is a little too restrictive. Like, I don't think... I don't know. If I was going to get another one, I would probably get an older model to save money on that, like one of the older iPad Pros or even an iPad Air, because they now have larger ones.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely. So tablets are so wonderful. But anyways, to my QGPs, first things first, I finally did it. I updated my Mac Mini to an M4 from an M1, and I love it. It's so funny because it's like Apple makes the migration process pretty simple. And then once I got back to it, it's like things weren't that different. They were snappier and I wasn't getting constant memory shortage updates. But like, I don't know, maybe it's a testament to how well these machines work that I was just like, oh, that's just kind of back to business as usual, but snappier. You know, I don't necessarily want to spend another $500 or $1,000 on a more advanced chip like the Pro or the Max. So I'm pretty happy with where I'm at for this one. But anyway, so I updated the Mac Mini, and that was great. But I also updated our router because that was had been going along for a while and was getting kind of gross. So I updated that and improved the Wi-Fi situation a little bit. And then I also kind of updated some minor updates to some gear I already had. So my Beyerdynamic headphones, the ones I'm wearing right now, the headband had gotten terribly worn out. Like, it was just so it was cracking and flaking all up in my hair, and it was getting gross, and it was
The
distracting
770s?
I can't remember exactly which brand I went with. They have a lot of replica brands on Amazon. Our guest, Jim Edgar, happened to send me a link to one that he recommended, and it feels great. It was a little stiff at first, but it is nice memory foam, and I was an idiot and put them on upside down before I realized the buttons don't go into your head, they go over the band. So fix that, but now they look like a brand new pair of headphones. They feel really comfortable again, and of course, I'm not clearing grit off of my head after every session. And then my other pair of headphones, my AKG 371s. They're actually recommended by Jordan Reynolds. They're great, affordable headphones. I got them for like $110 from Guitar Center, but the ear pads aren't great. And so I'd owned them for about a year, and they were starting to get crackly and torn and stuff like that. So I looked around for some brands that might fit. And then I found this company called Deconi, Dekoni, Deconi. And they're an audio company that makes headphone pads for headphones like the AKGs and various other models. So I got a nice pair of like fabric. It's almost like memory foam. They're super duper comfortable. They don't sweat. They also had some more vinyl and fake leather ones as well. For like $20, it breathed new life into my headphones, and they don't give me headaches or put pressure on my jaw, which is very important when you have TMJ.
Yeah, I'm surprised those DT770s fit on your giant head because, as we talked about, I couldn't wear them
easily.
For the same
I
reason.
have room. Like, I thought I had a pumpkin head, but yours.
Yeah, I guess mine must be even bigger because I can't wear them. They squeeze my head way too hard. I tried them, and I had to get rid of them. Actually, I gave them to my son.
You've got you have a tall head too. I noticed. So.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I was pinched coming out of the womb. Way too much information, but I was one of these kids that was breached, and they had to turn me around with forceps and like pull me out like a turkey. So yeah.
Oh wow!
I think it pinched my head when that happened. I forgot to mention I bought a new computer too. So
what? That's new.
Yeah, when I got rid of the booth, I sold my studio bricks. Ironically, to Marisha Tapera, I sold it to. I don't think I mentioned this. Who is a friend of the show. She's been a guest on before, and she did our initial introduction for the first like 4 years. She was the voice that did our intro. So I sold it to her because she was looking for a booth at the same time, one of the studio bricks, and she said, Paul, are you selling your studio bricks? And
that's a pretty good Marisha, actually.
Thank you. And I was like, I actually am. So it made it really easy because she's only about 25 miles from me in the DC suburbs. So my son and I loaded up in our van, drove it down. Great to have older kids, by the way. Oh my God. Like sometimes they get on my nerves, but now that they're older, so my son is now 6'4" and 170 pounds. So he's stronger than me. So
you got a nice ox for manual labor.
Yeah. So he and I unloaded the booth. Marisha gave him, I think, $100, and he helped me unload it. And it was really easy to get rid of it that way, as opposed to shipping it somewhere or having someone come pick it up at the house. And so Marisha's using the studio bricks anyway. I took some of those extra proceeds and bought a new computer because mine was dying, and I just went with an M1 Mac Mini, a terabyte drive, and it's worked wonders. It really solved all my problems because my MacBook Pro was choking terribly on all the audio I was trying to do.
Mm-hmm. No, that's honestly that's exactly what I was using pretty much. At the time, I wasn't able to get 1 terabyte of storage, so they only had the 8 gig memory and then the 512 for one of the base models that I got when I got it.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I just decided to experiment. I'm like, all right, we're just going to use this machine for as long as I can. And then, like I said, it was about 5 years before it really started slowing down. And then if it wasn't for all of the low memory updates, then I probably would have held on to it for a little longer. But it is an amazing machine.
Yeah, it really is night and day difference to have that M1. Although the only problem is I forgot that some of my software needs to be updated. So most of it was okay, but I do need to get the new Isotope RX because I was way back on 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
7 is choking on the new operating system, so I had to upgrade, which is fine. It was a good time anyway.
Damn,
so
you
I'll do it in a couple of days. Yeah.
So that wraps up our questionable gear purchases. We're going to talk about a few more with Jim after these messages.
How many times has this happened to you? You're listening to the radio when this commercial comes on. Not unlike this one, and this guy starts talking. Not unlike myself.
Or maybe it's a woman that starts talking. Not unlike myself. And you think to yourself, geez, I could do that.
Well, mister, well, missy, you just got one step closer to realizing your dream as a voiceover artist. Because now there's Global Voice Acting Academy. All the tools and straight from the hip, honest information you need to get on a fast track to doing this commercial yourself.
Well, not this one exactly.
Classes, private coaching, webinars, home studio setup, marketing and branding help, members-only benefits like workouts, rate and negotiation advice, practice scripts, and more. All without the kind of hype you're listening to right now. Go ahead, take our jobs from us. We dare you.
Speak for yourself, buddy. I like what I do.
And you will too when you're learning your craft at Global Voice Acting Academy. Find us at globalvoiceacademy.com.
Because you like to have fun.
Walgreens, because it's flu season, and you live in a place with doorknobs and handrails and, people.
We tried booking a vacation rental on one of those other websites. They don't always tell you everything.
The stars take it to the red carpet.
We are back live from the red carpet.
California leads the way for change in America, and so does Kamala Harris.
Rated M for mature. Claire Redfield.
And who exactly are you?
So, yeah, what hashtag should I use to describe a grown man in a tuxedo wrestling a goat?
And prior to 1933, many of them belonged to a variety of political parties that were now outlawed in Germany.
This is the story of how Q got curly. Quinn was crazy about curls. Curly fries, curly straws, curly-haired dogs.
Hey, Jay Michael here. Thanks for listening to the VO Meter podcast. It's one of my favorites. If you're looking for a great demo like the ones you just heard, check out jmcdemos.com for more information.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the interview portion of this episode of the VO Meter. Today, we're pleased to welcome Jim Edgar. Now, Jim's a full-time working voice actor, but he also does tech consultations and works with students to help get their sound up to snuff. He's also, for whatever reason, an avid listener of the podcast. He's probably the person that's sent me the most emails and comments about the show, which we really appreciate because we have no idea if anyone else is listening. It might just be Jim. So
No, there's more than that.
The mouthpiece of our audience.
But we're really happy to have Jim as a guest today to talk about how he helps people get their voiceover studios set up. So welcome, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's good to be here and hang out with you in real time. So both you and Sean, are voices that have been, I think, guiding a lot of new and knowledgeable voice actors along the path for many years. So I'm just really pleased to be on here. So thank you.
Well, you too. I mean, definitely a kindred spirit. Not just a friend of the podcast, but he's a friend of mine as well. I got to see him up in Bellingham a few weeks ago, actually, which was very nice. But like I said, you're very much kindred spirits because you went from learning about voice acting yourself all the way back in 2012 to becoming a bit of an instructor and mentor for people trying to learn the tech aspects and other aspects of EO. So we want to learn all about that. Specifically, how did you get started with voiceover?
I think I was destined to find my way there. My big admission is that growing up, my closest friends were all animated characters, so I kind of lived for Saturday mornings and, got to hang out with my cool friends who happened to be rabbits and squirrels and things like that. And then, when I was really young, my dad, and you guys can probably footnote what this is for some of your listeners, but my dad brought home this thing called a cassette deck from work. And I started writing, at way too young an age, radio plays, and so I would kind of tell these cool, scary stories into the tape recorder and do the voices for it, and I kind of got interested in it really early, and then just kind of never lost the interest. I kept kind of recording voices and being transfixed by it. When I played in some bands in high school and college, and I was like the guys bringing the tape recorder to figure out how to actually capture our performance and things like that. And kind of put that aside after college and went to work in retail, was in kind of the outdoor industry and the bicycle business for many years as a marketing guy and kind of teaching. We had multi-store operations, so I was kind of teaching our staff how to sell and deal with things. And every year I would see this thing on television, or I'd see this article in the newspaper that talked about this thing called voiceover. And it was one of those things where you just go, God, I just really want to do that. That just sounds fun. I get to do this thing where I talk and people, I think I'm a character or something like that. And every year I would kind of ignore it. Another year would come around. It's like, oh, I didn't do that this last year. And I think finally my wife got really tired of our dogs, me talking for our dogs and having them sing and talk to each other in public, which kind of tends to make people look at you really strangely, even if you're in a dog park.
I was going to say, if your dogs are starting to talk, you have a whole other issue there.
No. Well, they're not actually telling me to do anything. They're just suggesting some ideas that might help. No. But I was, and I would kind of, lapse into these little conversations between us, and I think people would edge away politely. And she finally figured that, hey, maybe I can just sort of give him, direct this energy. And she gave me a little, morning 3-hour voiceover class at a local voiceover institute. I walked into that and it was like, oh, I'm home. I need to do this. I need to learn. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And, I didn't have any acting background. I didn't have any acting training. I did, sports and other stuff in high school. And so just never was in that group. And so I had to kind of quickly figure out that it was actually voice acting. And I had to learn how to act and, did some improv, which scared the crud out of me, and took some scene study classes and took a lot of voiceover classes. And right about that time, it was about 2007, all these kind of more advanced actors started showing up back in some of the classes because Starz agency, which is here in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Bay Area, suddenly told all their actors that they would no longer come in to audition. So they all had to start recording themselves back then, which was a big shift. We kind of take it for granted now that's what we do. But in the first couple of classes I took, the instructors would give us, helpful suggestions like, when you go into your agency to audition, find a quiet corner so you can study the script. And, all of a sudden they stopped saying that because agencies were starting to say, hey, we don't have we don't have the staff to handle this stuff. It's much more efficient if we just get these from the voice actors. But it meant that all these people who had a lot of skill in terms of performing had no idea how to set that up and capture it at home. And word kind of got out that I knew how to do that. I'd just been messing around in studios and what we used to call computer music studios back in the day because nobody would record with a computer in an actual studio. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd done digital recording, kind of on the outset of it and messed around with that over the years and kind of knew that stuff. And so people started saying, hey, can you help me set up a home studio? And so while I was learning the craft and skills necessary for voiceover, I was also, helping all these people in the Bay Area set up their studios. And so that's kind of where that all started. They found that they needed to be able to produce high quality audio. And that was a big difference in who was booking stuff and who wasn't. Because, at that time it was like I take my iPhone and, I stand in my tiled bathroom and wonder why it sounds kind of funny. So it was a big correction for all of them. And then that kind of became its own thing. And I think, it's like voiceover keeps hitting me with a big cartoon hammer until I listen. First of all, just coming into voiceover by itself. And then secondarily, people would keep saying, yeah, they just said to just ask Jim, how to, set up my studio. And so it's finally dawned on me, it's like, that's a cool URL. I should probably just use that. And so set up justaskjimvo.studio as my kind of audio consulting website. And so that started moving in parallel with everything else and kind of blossomed from there. Started teaching classes at, through Berkeley Rep School of Theater, through voice tracks up here in the Bay Area. And then I continue to teach down through Voice One in San Francisco with Sally Clausen, who took that over about 5 years ago.
That's great. So to expand on that a little bit, Sean and I both do the same thing. And sometimes we charge, sometimes we don't. We kind of took it under our wing for this entire podcast to make it the point of helping people who are getting into the business. So I'm wondering, how do you help people? What are your specialties when it comes to home studio setup?
Well, I do a couple different things. First of all, I'm just enough of a computer nerd to remember the days of Usenet and the early days of the internet where, and this is going to sound like a completely tangential reference, but there was a guy named Sheldon Brown who was this bicycle, I
remember Sheldon. I used to see his blogs all the time for anything. Yeah, I do a lot of biking as well.
Exactly. And so Sheldon was, kind of the king of internet help back in the day. And he had this huge website where, if you wanted to learn how to pull apart one of those English 3-speed internally geared hubs, you went to Sheldon's site. The meme was AASHTA, which I think stands for as always, Sheldon has the answer. And so I was just really, I think, swept up with that kind of attitude that existed on the internet back then, which is that, if I have some knowledge, I'm going to share it with people. And so that's kind of why I started just posting articles on my site. I do, weekly emails to my list, and then they get posted on my site. And they're just kind of hopefully little helpful things for folks. So I try to share that out there. It's kind of why I keep posting in a lot of the public groups, some of the Facebook groups, LinkedIn, Reddit, and things like that, where, if there's just too much egregiously wrong information that is kind of accepted as fact. And so if I can at least offer, another view of something, I try to kind of jump in and do that. And then one of the things that I started doing, because audio, talking about audio in a discussion group with words is, who was that Laurie Anderson quote? It's like, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It just doesn't work. And so you need to hear what things sound like to make any kind of, viable feedback. And so I started to set up a little slot on my site where people can upload their audio just to get a quick review of it, to tell them, hey, this does sound good, or hey, this sounds like you are in, a marble hallway and the echoes never end. But that sort of, I try to offer that stuff up for folks just to put them on the right path. And then one of the major things I do, and this is like, I think more an aesthetic perspective, is I'm not really interested in giving people, a recipe for things. That there are a lot of folks who just will say, oh, just, put this here, push this one button and everything's going to work. And I like to go a little more under the hood than that. And the people I think that come to me want to have a little deeper understanding of, okay, what's actually going on, to make my audio ready for an audiobook, or what's actually going on to, get rid of this cruft and grunge that's in my audition file. How do I clean that up, and why is it getting cleaned up with these weird tools? And so, I kind of start working with folks to make their workflow efficient. I work across pretty much every recording platform that you're going to use for VO. I'm not a huge Reaper guy because that's just sort of an endless rabbit hole of things that you can tune. So almost nobody's Reaper setup kind of matches anybody else because it's infinitely tunable, which is a great thing. But for a lot of us who are also trying to get work out the door, it can be one of those
the black hole.
Yeah, well, it can present a high level of distraction. And so, if something came up like that back when I was in my 20s or 30s, I'd mess with it all the time. But it's, for getting work out the door on a daily basis, my perspective is always that a lot of these multi-track recording software packages like Pro Tools, like Studio One, like Reaper are really overkill for what we need to do on a daily basis. And so even if I set something up in any of those DAWs for people, it's always about simplifying it. It's always about letting the tech be there enough to support the process so that we kind of don't have to think about it.
I was going to say, I actually really love your weekly newsletter. It's one of the few VO-related ones I still subscribe to. Like you said, you have this very much like KISS principle, or keep it simple, silly, but to your studios, and just sort of summarizing a bunch of your articles. But I love that, like, you don't always, like, you tell people not to be distracted by the shiny stuff. Don't be a magpie and be open to more affordable tools and simpler tools, right? Like a great example is how you might praise the SSL interfaces versus the very popular and shiny Universal Audio ones, for example. And save people a few $100 to a few $1,000 that way. But also, not only that you encourage simple tools and efficient tools, but one thing that I think is really cool is that every now and then you'll do a re-examination, or like looking at things from a different perspective and asking yourself, how can I optimize things at this point now that I'm more familiar? So I like those little reminders to always be learning new stuff, but also be honing and polishing and fine-tuning what you have and making sure it's working as well as it can.
Honored that you read that stuff that closely, so I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it isn't a one-and-done process. And, much the way that we were all, when we first, stepped behind the mic and we had a little bit of confidence, we were sure that we were the, next big thing. And then we listened back to those auditions a couple years later and go, oh, okay, I've learned some things since then. Well, the same thing's going to be true on any aspect of your business. If it's something like the technical stuff in the studio, or more often it's just a little habit we get into. You sort of have that wonderful perspective when I work with a new client. I get to kind of see them. It's all either Zoom or in person. So I kind of have them go into their studio and say, "Well, show me what you do." And all of a sudden you realize like there's 3 steps that are either redundant or you just don't need because you're fixing something somewhere else. And 1 or 2 steps or a little bit of inefficiency here and there doesn't seem like a lot until you think, oh, I do 10 auditions, a day. And if I'm doing that same thing that takes me a few extra minutes, well, that's 30 minutes. And that's 30 minutes I don't get to market, or I don't get to reinforce my skills, or I don't get to, go walk my dogs or restore myself. And so all these things, definitely add up. And in all these things, in all things, we get iteratively better the more we do them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we talked about how you started getting into the coaching and tech side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my opinions on how that was around the same time several years ago. One thing I want to talk about is how things have changed in terms of new people coming to the business and how receptive, or more apropos, how non-receptive they are. Do you find that people are more confrontational and not wanting to listen to advice? Because that's what I'm finding. And if so, how do you overcome those?
Well, I would say a couple things. And again, stories out of school. I think it was the second voiceover class I was in, and this, very knowledgeable person with one of those voiceover voices leaned over to me and, said, well, you got to use Pro Tools because it's the best, and you should put compression on everything. And I was like,
oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And that person, probably to the point at which they decided not to do voiceover anymore, never evaluated that fact. I think there's always going to be people that hear a truth, or they have a really strong ego involvement with, I need to be identified with this software or this microphone or this thing. And, there's always a segment of those folks. I think that we can just show up and say, hey, just offer what we have. I don't know that that's changed a lot. I think that my sense is that the misinformation kind of spreads faster than it did, back in 2007, 2010.
Mm-hmm.
That, but it also, I think, gets dislodged a little quicker too. You think about, for example, I think when we all got into it, everybody said, well, the NT1A from Rode, it's the voiceover mic. And, you kind of listen to that thing. It's like, well, that is sounding a little screechy in the upper end. It's got this really strong lift. It sounds nasty when I get loud. It sounds really horrific on female voices. And that's what I'm supposed to use. And so how long did that hang on until people finally said, well, maybe the NT1, which is, nice and level in its response, is a better mic for people.
I'm still having to explain the difference between the NT1A and the NT1. But going back to your point, when the NT1A first came out, it was pretty unusual to have a $250 mic that sounded as good as it did. But now I can think of half a dozen in that price range that I'd recommend over it.
Absolutely. And the fact, the current and Rode, just to nerd out on Rode for a little bit, I mean, they've done a great thing. They optimized the heck out of their, supply chain and figured out how to do it, how to make quality mics, quality and useful mics for a good price. But yeah, that thing's what, $160 now? I mean, that's ridiculous.
The signature one, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, but it has a good sound. It's not going to, sound like fingernails on a chalkboard if your voice is up in the upper frequencies. And, it's stunning. I always say, I am old enough to have remembered, what the first computer that I bought, was a Mac way back when. And
you're more advanced than me. Mine was a Commodore 64.
Well, it wasn't the first one I used. It was the first one I saved up for, and so, but it was I think it was a Mac SE20, which had, it had a 20 megabyte hard drive. And oh my God, how am I going to fill that thing up? And the Apple, we were using these Apple II computers in the computer music studio that had, I'm going to say, I think we updated it so it had 128K of RAM. And so you worked within those limits, which, forced you to be efficient. It forced you to do this stuff. But, you look around now, it's like we live in a time of riches, man.
Definitely.
The fact that we can get something like a Scarlett, which has, the 2i2, which has an auto gain set tool. It has a safe mode for $200. There's nothing else that you need, for voiceover. We don't need to get super sophisticated. And, that technology was just not there, 10 years ago. It's just a phenomenal value for what we spend. And the same thing happened with mics. I mean, Paul, I know you and I are both real fans of the Mini K87 from Roswell. And, again, that thing at $440, $450 is just an amazingly good mic. It has a much better sound for more people than a lot of the, shall we call them more well-known microphones from a certain German company. They just sound really good on people. And again, technology, what is it, Moore's Law, which is that the technology is going to get half as expensive or twice as fast every 18 months. That seems to apply to our end too. All this stuff is coming out that, 10, 15 years ago cost, $400 or $500 for a okay interface, and now we're spending $200 for something that's just crazy good.
Yeah, it's nuts. Now, I was just thinking, like a decade ago, like a lot of people would be like, oh, if you're not spending $500 or $700 on your mic, that'll never last your whole career. And like now, you can spend a half or a quarter of that and be fine. It's pretty nuts.
I do have an ethical / philosophical question around that, though. And
okay,
it came up at the One Voice conference, which I attended a few weeks ago. I'm wondering, the discussion was basically that due to the proliferation of bad audio that's out there, both on the news, on streaming services, on YouTube, people recording with AirPods, on CNN thinking it sounds fine, people doing podcasts on a Blue Yeti still, or even worse, or out
don't say Snowball,
right? Or out in the street recording with on the local news with all the ambient sound and not doing any post processing. Do you think people's ears are getting used to crap? Or do you think the technology is that good that prices are coming down and making it easier barrier of entry?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I correlate those two things exactly parallel with one another.
Well, the reason I bring it up, just one more anecdotal story. I was out your guys' way a couple of weeks ago in San Diego, and I got a call for a job. And I was kind of not prepared. I only really had one of my live announce mics with me and nothing else. I happened to be in a pretty nice Airbnb with a walk-in closet. So I jumped in there, did the job on my SM58, and the client, who normally records from the studio, said, "That sounds great. It's fine. Send me an invoice." And I was thinking, wow, why do I spend all this money and all this stuff I have at home when I could just jump into my kid's closet with SM58?
Yeah, I think that should be your whole thing. I would say, I use my SM58, I hammer nails with it, and then I jump in the booth. I think that there's a lot of things going on. I think if you have a client that already understands that you generally deliver good work, I think they give us a lot of leeway. I think also that there are a lot of tools that can make stuff usable, which is not the same thing as giving a client high quality audio. And so, one of the things that I think is still a truth in this business is that there's always a lot more voice actors than there are jobs. And so as we develop clients rather than get work, and I think those are two distinct things, people will work with us if we solve problems for them. And you may have a great audition or a great read that is sonically garbage. And if it's a great read, the tools are there to salvage it, but it's going to add production costs. It's going to add production time. And you may get that one job, but you're probably not going to create a client out of that. I always try to think, how can I make my client's job easier? What can I do for them that lets them say, oh, I'm just going to call Paul or I'm going to call Sean because I know they'll solve the problem for me. If you've worked with that client before, they know, hey, it's like this probably isn't as good, empirically between what he normally gives us, but it's good enough for this purpose. And it's not, it's not going to cause problems because, again, when you went into that room with that microphone, you also brought with you the skill in mic technique and the skill in recording technique. So it wasn't completely blown out. It wasn't distorted at the microphone. You brought all those techniques that you had in with you with something that technically wasn't probably the most appropriate tool for the job, but it captured that performance in that moment. And I don't think that a client, I think that if our initial auditions to a client sound like crud, then they're going to go, well, yeah, great performance, but I've got this other person that I don't have to mess with. Their audio comes in clean. So I don't think that there's a great change in, send us anything and we'll deal with it. I think that there are probably more people who are relying on that, which means that if we pay a little more attention to that and we're giving our clients good audio, they're going to notice it even if they can't articulate it. And I think that's again, that's part of my business model. And I do think that that's of value. I think there are genres where it doesn't matter as much these days, but again, that's sort of style and aesthetics than anything else.
It is interesting, and I think a big part of that is because we're all very much invested in this world. And for on to your point, Paul, I mean, the audio stuff is very much a hobby for us too. We like learning about all the shinies and stuff like that. What kills me is seeing podcasters and people on YouTube holding a Shure SM7B by the hand and doing their whole video essay from that. And it sends people the completely wrong impression of how to do this. If you want to, you didn't have to spend $400. You could have just got an SM58 and hold it that way.
Well, I think there's a whole market in, sort of like phone covers. We'll just do mic covers, we'll just have a little SM58, but we'll put a U87 around it.
Just a little cosplay for him.
Yeah, exactly. Just to go around, make your nasty mic look cool.
Well, it's so funny. It's there's this call for authenticity, and people just, to me, it just feels like a lack of care. Because man, we used to put this mic off screen and we used to do all this, but now the blemishes are attractive to us to make sure that it's a human being. But I don't know. It's a weird time we're in right now.
Well, I think everybody always thinks it's a weird time, but I would agree that this timeline is very strange.
This is indeed a disturbing universe.
This is a disturbing universe. I digress. But, I think a lot of that is driven by, aesthetics that that we, there's the whole argument about, what is there really that microphone in front of that podcaster? Is that really how they're getting the sound? And, they're props for a visual medium, whether or not, and I think that there's probably some poor audio engineer who is, having to either clean up all those little hand bumps and the imperfections of it, or they're just using an off-screen mic and using that audio. You never know.
I hadn't even thought about that. I'm thinking of Howard Stern, the way he uses a Neumann. I can't think of it.
I think he's got. I want to say he's got a U87.
Yeah, he's got a U87.
He used to have 103s for the longest time.
Oh yeah, it was a 103, and he holds it in his palm, and he can't possibly be using it because otherwise there would be so much noise. But because he fists it the entire time.
Yeah, but it gives him a prop.
Same thing with Jimmy Fallon and the AT-4047. They just have it on his desk. I don't think it's plugged into anything.
Yeah, no, but and that dates back to the Carson days. They had a little mic sitting on his desk that was probably not wired into anything. We have to sort of scrape off the visual distractions and say, for what we do, which isn't necessarily podcasting, which isn't necessally,
except right now
on screen, except for superior podcasts such as the VO meter, that we're dealing with, delivering audio to folks, and there's also, there's style. Like I say, it's the way stuff sounded in the 80s is different from the 90s, is different from the aughts, and I think that, like most things, the pendulum's going to probably swing back. That I hate to call it into existence again, but I haven't heard much from the realm of ASMR recently. Maybe I've just, blocked all those channels, but that was a little trend that, came and I hope went away. It's just, one of those things that kind of pops into popular culture, just like, oh, I've got this mic in my hand because everything's so immediate and I'm on the go. You're sending a message with what you choose to show on screen. But I think good audio still matters for what we do. We may, I think I'm sure both of you get the auditions that I see where the first direction is don't sound like a voice actor. And it's like, well, why did I take all these damn classes?
Exactly.
Why did I invest in all this stuff? But that's, but what they're getting at is that in order to sound legitimate, we have to sound less practiced. We have to sound less presentational. And that's really tough to do when you're standing in front of a microphone. It takes a while before you kind of have enough confidence, I think, with your ability to tell that story without leaning into the musicality of your voice. And so, I think there's imperfect direction. I think there's imperfect examples. But, what we're not trying to do in our own studios is be perfect. And that's sort of, I think, if they're saying it perhaps a little bit clumsily, I think that's the message that, we are all in the time of AI, obviously. We are all to the point where somebody can synthesize a voice that has that degree of perfection that suddenly sounds a little disconcerting to us. We're not the only industry dealing with that, obviously, that everybody, in every industry is getting impacted. But the way it impacts us in voiceover is this idea of perfection. And, Sean, I think you and I, when we were hanging out up in Bellingham, we were talking about, what's going to matter for voiceover, what's going to matter for real voice actors in real time. And I think it does come back to the idea of dynamic tension and a performance, that we still see plays, we still see live music. There's something that, there's that possibility of failure, and watching a talented performer solve that in real time, I think is very inspiring to us. I don't think that's going to go away in voiceover. As with everything else, continue to shift and mutate, along with the culture as we move forward. But that idea of storytelling is more than just the words on the page. And I think that's something that we as performers, we as voice actors can get at better than something that's more synthetic.
Yeah, well said. So I want to get into the tech a little bit, because you are known as one of the tech gurus, and I think I am a little bit as well. So I'd love to get your opinion on your current favorites in microphone, interface, and DAW, or digital audio workstation.
Okay. Working backwards, I am regularly using Twisted Wave for 99.9% of what I do. That for voiceover, there's almost no reason to be reaching for a multi-track situation unless you're, recording multiple voice actors in real time. And I think that is so accessible for a new actor that it's so understandable for people who have never done any serious recording, that it lets them get up and running really quickly, but it has insanely detailed and deep tools under the hood.
Using it right now, as a matter of fact.
Good for you, man. That's excellent. I like that. But I think you were part of the group when Thomas started asking for more features, for feature requests.
Yeah, I threw a hissy fit for sure.
No. But my point was more that when that list of features came back from what people were asking for, I was going through it. It's like, well, that's in it. That does it. Yes, they can already do that. You can already do this. You can, and there were probably, at least a third and maybe as much as a half of the things people were asking for are already there in the application. And it gets at, the way that most of us learn, any kind of app is that we do the simple thing that we have to do, and we don't go off piste. We don't go beyond the borders. And so it sometimes takes a little bit of saying, okay, I have 15 minutes. So what does this do? How will it help me? And I come from a time when manuals were really bad, not that they're that much better. And it was expected that we had to learn, the undocumented features of the software that we had. We had to solve problems with it. For those of you who have the weird recording bingo card at home, I started using a thing called Opcode Vision way back when, which was a MIDI sequencer that had digital recording. And, it literally had unintelligible manual of 500 pages or so. And so if you wanted to get anything done, he's like, okay, what does this do? What does that do? So I kind of kept doing that with Twisted Wave. I mean, it's how I found that. I don't know if we ever talked. I think Sean, you were gracious enough to host me doing a Twisted Wave thing on GVAA. And I talked about there's a undocumented feature with labeling markers in there.
Oh, yeah. It blew my mind.
Yeah. And I just, again, it was one of those things. It's like, well, what happens if I do this? And it's like, oh, my God, that just, took 4 hours out of my production because I don't have to type in all the names for markers. And stuff like that exists in this really robust, really stable program. So, yeah, I haven't looked too far outside of that. The only thing I think it benefits from is the addition of Isotope RX for what we do, because if you're delivering anything, that's final work to an audiobook or something like that, the most time-consuming thing is picking out all the mouth clicks that exist. And so, yeah, the RX standard tool with mouth declick, man, that thing's worth $400, tomorrow if you need it for a job. So that's kind of the main software that I lean into. for my stuff. And I do teach and train people on Audacity and, Adobe Audition and Studio One and Pro Tools and all those things. But if somebody says, hey, what should I use? I definitely would say, hey, try this out. You can download it for 30 days, see if it makes sense to you, and just know that it will do anything you're likely to need it to do. For interfaces, I always kind of feel like it's a little overstated that, again, as I was saying earlier, since we're living in such a time of riches for gear, a good basic brand name interface is plenty. I would say that the Focusrite Scarlett series is a very good value, that 2i2 rather than the Solo. I kind of no longer recommend that Solo simply because when they went to the Gen 4, which is the current model for the 2i2, which is a 2-input interface, they did not use the same
converter.
No, I was going to say the converter's the same, but the preamp is not the same. So they use the older preamp, and it also does not have either the auto gain feature or the safe mode, which is, so for an extra $50, it's definitely worth getting the 2i2. That both of those things will really help us to stress less when we're in the booth doing stuff. I still like the SSL. I think that's a really, really good one. Those are kind of the two that I keep going to. I've got, because I kind of need more paint in my life, I actually have 2 studios here at the house. I started getting people calling me, because of the audio consulting thing and saying, hey, I want to record my audiobook. And it's like, my booth's in my house. I really don't want to, have strangers coming to the door. And then I was able to set one up. We have a separate unit out back, and ended up setting that up. So I do work with vetted narrators and authors now out there. That one I run on a Scarlett 2i2. The one in my main one that I use for auditioning and everything is the SSL, the SSL2, which is just a great little unit. I like the fact that with the Mark II, they finally put an LED under the 48-volt power button, which was my main complaint with it. But other than that, just a good, solid, real piece of gear. And, little things like, the cheaper stuff, you start twiddling the knobs and dials, and a year down, all of a sudden it gets kind of scratchy when you get little pops and crackles coming out of those cheap ones. So I think it's worth, stepping up to one or the other of those two. I did become one of the people who bought the Passport VO, which is an extremely voiceover-specific solution that the guys over at the Pro Audio Suite, George Whittam, and the gang over there came up with. And that's kind of become my travel interface. It's mostly because it's small and I can kind of take it with me easily. But it's definitely amazing in terms of sound. It's got a great little internal compressor, and it's actually got 2 audio interfaces in it, so you can do all sorts of deep nerding in terms of routing audio out to different applications without having to use software routing inside your computer. So it's really a powerful beast, but it's probably not something that somebody who's new to the business would want to dip into.
Do they do full production on that, or are they still waiting?
They did 100 with the first run, and as of, we're recording this fall 2025, I think they had a couple people who ended up not getting the unit, and so I know they have a few that they can ship. I think he was saying there's about 10 available on that. So I don't know that they're going to, I know they haven't done a second run on it. These are all from the first run. But that thing's, again, useful for what we do, and not to, there's not, Sean, you had mentioned the Apollo from Universal Audio, which is kind of the one everybody says, oh, get the Apollo because that's what the pros use. And a lot of what you're paying for that is, in fact, the processing that's in the device itself. And so for most of what we do, it's not really as cost effective as I think a lot of other ones are. It was really designed, and again, this goes back in the day. It goes back to the time when computers were not quite fast enough to do any kind of dynamic inbound processing. And so Universal Audio solved that problem by putting essentially putting plugins inside the firmware of the interface. So as you were speaking, you could dial up a compressor, you could dial up, some sound tuning, and have all that being done to your audio as you brought it into your recording application, and it gave you zero latency monitoring. So if you were recording in a band and needed to hear yourself in time, it solved a problem that existed in Pro Tools at that time. And so, it's a very good piece of gear, but it solves a lot of problems that we don't necessarily all have as voice actors, unless we're.
And another thing too is it's very easy to just keep throwing money down that rabbit hole. You're if you think you're solving a problem, or if you're just like, look at all the new shinies. Because for people who don't know, like Jim was saying, that the overall benefit of this is what's called their DSP, or digital signal processing, or inbuilt processing, and their lowest tier device is what's called the Apollo Solo, and it's like $500. And then, but it can only support maybe 2, maybe 3 plugins at most. So hopefully that's all you need. But I mean, even that, like, you're probably spending $150 to $300 per plugin, so you're already at $1,000. And if you get the actually recommended models, the duos, then those are at least $800 to $1,000, and so you're already getting into like the $1,300 or $1,500 price bracket. And you may or may not have solved your problem, or just have a very expensive paperweight.
Yeah, and I would argue almost everybody I know who has the Apollo, and I don't deal with a lot of people that do real-time network promo, because that's a niche that probably needs that tool set. But for most of the voice actors who have that, they've never even used any of that inbound processing. So what they have is a device that'll do all these tricks, but they're never actually using.
They're just using it as an interface.
It's just using it as an interface, yeah. And it's a good interface. I'm certainly not saying it isn't. And it gives you, I think one of the things it does nicely is that it gives you a lot of, mentioned the idea of software routing, where you're sending, discrete signals to different software inside of your computer. It allows you to do that, but
it's extremely complicated, at least in my experience.
Yes.
as you both probably know, I used to have one, and I had it specifically to run an onboard expander, because that was one of the things that I liked using it for. But I had to have George Whittam set up the routing for me, even with all my experience, because I couldn't figure it out. And then if something went wrong, I had to call him, so I gave up on it. And now I use a Tascam Mixcast 4, which is just a regular mixer.
Okay. Yeah.
And has an expander built into it that I have turned on. It's one switch, and it's set it and forget it.
Well, if you got to stop selling off all your
recording
your booths.
Yeah.
I was going to say you had like 4 booths at your house at one point.
I
keep
did,
selling
yeah.
them off. Yeah. So yeah.
I joke that Paul has a revolving door in his studio.
I like that. That's good. That'd be cool.
Well, I don't know how you'd soundproof it, but
well, it'd actually be pretty well soundproof. But the problem would be getting your headphone cable in and out of it without strangling yourself, I think.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about a booth within a booth within a booth. I could have taken my Drum Perfect booth, stuck it inside the vocal booth to go, and stuck that inside the studio break, so we'd be all done.
There you go.
Double wall, triple wall,
we call that
wall.
the Stefano. 3 layers of booth. Brought to you by Paul Stefano.
It'd be like that Friends episode where
Stefano or something.
Remember that Friends episode where Joey put on all of Chandler's clothes at once? Like, look at me, I have all the booths at once.
Oh no! Could I be wearing any more clothes?
Exactly. Could I have any more particle board?
Yeah. So when we talk about interfaces, obviously, I say that's a secondary item, but the most important item outside of your space is going to be the mic, because that's kind of the main filter. And I think that people need to be realistic. I think they need to think about how much can I reasonably spend on all this stuff. And if I was just going to reach for one mic and somebody had a decent amount of budget, I go right to that Roswell K87. I think that's a really good mic. It's fairly low profile. It has a nice low profile shock mount, so it's not going to be problematic to mount. As much as I like the Rode NT1, I think their elastic shock mount and pop screen layout is really tricky sometimes, given that we're often in a very imperfect space and have to bring the mic in from different angles. And so one of the weird things on the road is that it forces you to put the pop screen 180 degrees away from where it attaches to the mic arm itself.
Yeah, it has that weird cutout, almost like a Pac-Man face.
And well, it's they've gone through a couple, and they've kind of gotten that habit, about 5 years ago, of designing designing their shock mounts, which made you kind of lock the pop screen into a certain specific place. And a lot of the times in a small area, I'm bringing mics in from the side and turning everything kind of 90 degrees in the shock mount. But if that pop screen is immovable, then that's going to be a problem. But you can also just take that off and then use a separate pop screen, or you can put the mic in an appropriate position and not need a pop screen, which is kind of where I am on my approach to most stuff. That I think pop screens are kind of a little bit of a security blanket for folks, and if you get that mic positioned well, oftentimes you find you really don't need it, that it's not necessarily going to be something that's going to do as much as you might think.
Well, it's probably wrong, honestly. If you have to use the pop filter, you're probably too close or at the wrong angle to begin with.
Yeah, no, both those things are absolutely true. I think that it's, again, like we were talking earlier, you see these things in podcasts where people are talking right into the capsule of the microphone, and that's just not ideal. I always spend a little bit of time with folks when we're working on setting up their booths to really dial in that mic position, because just doing it right solves so many problems. I mean, we work in highly imperfect places. They're too small, which makes them acoustically really complex. And we work the mic way too close, so it picks up all of our mouth sounds and popped Ps and plosives and things like that. And taking a little extra time to position that thing, if it can solve those problems, all of a sudden, most mics will sound a lot better. But anyway, back to the actual question, the Roswell Mini K87 is excellent. I am recommending that really over the 102s these days and the 103s. I think it handles sibilance a lot better. It's hard to say no to a $160 Rode NT1. Other than that, I still have a soft spot for Mojave. I think is a really kind of underknown, is that a word? Less well-known solution, which is a really good mic. Their 201 is just a really good neutral microphone that I've set up a lot of folks with, and I use myself. And then on the shotgun side of things, obviously there's a certain sound to the 416, but that's a big investment for folks. I do like that AT875R. I started, I think George put me onto that originally.
Yeah, I have one of those.
I think you did too, actually.
Yeah.
I think I might have heard it from you first.
I use it for travel most of the time.
Yeah. That's a ridiculously good mic. I've used that. That kind of has become my travel mic rather than dragging my 416 around with me.
Yeah, mine has been on TV commercials, not by me, but by my daughter when she's book stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning the Roswell, by the way. I swear this was completely unplanned, but as you know, they're a sponsor of the show. Matt McGlynn will be very happy that you had some praise for the Mini K87.
Well, Matt, yeah, I mean, Matt's been such an asset to the microphone and recording community for so long with, recording hacks and then mic parts. I think I think he got interviewed by Lid Shaw over on Recording Studio Rockstars many, many years ago. And he said, well, this is the truth about mics. There's only probably 4 capsules, and, what you do with those capsules matter. And here's the way I approach it. And it's like, oh, okay, that kind of locked in all these, kind of feelings and impressions that we've had for many years. It's like, that now makes sense. That's why a 414 sounds like it does.
He's kind of like the Sheldon Brown of microphones, I think.
Yeah, that's a good, that's a incredible, that's a appropriate insight. I like that. Yeah.
So as long as we're talking about gear, if you have a few more minutes, we talked about recording space. Are you team booth or team acoustically treated room?
I am not a car guy, but I'm definitely a drag race, run what you brung kind of guy. So that's, I think, a drag race term. But again, since I'm not a drag racer, I don't know.
I've announced some drag races, so I think that works, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that they are different equations to solve. And oftentimes, it's like I kind of trolled Craigslist for almost a year before I found a used vocal booth out in the Central Valley here in California. Drove over, drug it back, put it up, and it was like, it sounds horrific. It's horrible. Why did I want this thing? But because where I'd been recording before was like basically a hallway in our house, which again I had iteratively treated. I knew where it sounded bad and how it sounded bad, and I had to go through all that again with my own 4x4 vocal booth. I do think that most of the booths that have that kind of 2-inch thick foam wallpaper generally are going to sound bad. That this booth that I'm in right now is that same vocal booth, but I stripped it out a couple of years ago when all the foam was starting to kind of degrade and rot out, and put in heavier panels from ATS Acoustics, which are 4 and 2-inch Rockwool panels. And this booth, suddenly doesn't need all that bass trapping that I had. I mean, it's got bass traps in it, but it's not the big foam block things. Mm-hmm. I've become less a fan of foam more than anything else. That I would much rather see somebody build up a PVC framed acoustic blanket booth with some really dense acoustic blankets, the vocal booth to go, the Filmcraft stuff, something that weighs, 10 pounds ish, rather than the little lightweight stuff you get down at Home Depot. But that's going to work probably better than a poorly treated hard-walled booth. And then when you start putting yourself in a smaller hard-walled space, that's where I'd look for Rockwool or acoustic panels as a solution rather than foam. Because to get, the thing about foam is that we stick it to the wall. The thing about foam is it lets through lower frequencies, that it does not, particularly 2-inch foam, won't really knock down anything down in the low rumbly or even low vocal range. And so that hits the wall and then bounces back into the room, which means that it peels off all the upper frequencies, and all we have is this low frequency thing sounding kind of like that, which is not really, appropriate for what we do. Rockwool is much more even. It takes out a lot of that low frequency, but then those soft-walled booths kind of don't contain those low frequencies. The low frequencies pass out through an acoustic blanket and then dissipate in the room, so we don't have that low frequency buildup. Also with the blankets, what happens is that because that sound disperses in the room before it bounces back, it actually goes through those blankets twice, so it loses a lot of energy. So a lot of the times I've had people, get those acoustic blanket booths and think, oh, this is going to be a temporary solution, and they use it for most of their career. If they're in a relatively quiet area, it creates a really good acoustic space in which to record.
Well, that's what I found. As you probably know, I've gone back to a vocal booth to go booth. It is the soundproofer double wall, which means it does have mass-loaded vinyl too.
Yeah, nice.
2 layers of it. But inside, I have nothing. It's just the blankets. Or in my old booth, I had foam chunks everywhere for bass traps. I had denim panels set up to absorb all the bass. Here is nothing. It's just the blankets, and it sounds fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, no, it does sound good. I can tell. I mean, I've noticed that on the recent podcast that you have got a nice balanced tone. So that's a good way to go.
I appreciate it.
In these modern times, every business needs a website. When you need a website for your voice acting business, there's only one place to go. Like the name says, voiceactorwebsites.com. Their experience in this niche webmaster market gives them the ability to quickly and easily get you from concept to live online in a much shorter time. When you contact voiceactorwebsites.com, their team of experts and designers really get to know you and what your needs are. They work with you to highlight what you do. Then they create an easily navigable website for your potential clients to get the big picture of who you are and how your voice is the one for them. Plus, VoiceActorWebsites.com has other great resources, like their practice script library and other resources to help your voiceover career flourish. Don't try it yourself. Go with the pros. VoiceActorWebsites.com, where your VO website shouldn't be a pain in the you-know-what.
So thanks to Jim for being on the show. I kind of forgot he hadn't been on before because he's been such
We talk to him all the time.
Yeah, he's always sending us messages or even contributions for the show and suggestions. So it's kind of a shame we hadn't had him on yet. So I'm really happy we had him on, talk about his business and how he got into it and how he helps people. It was really great to speak to you, Jim.
Yeah, it was great, Jim. I mean, you're a close friend, and I've benefited from your teaching and from your blog, and always enjoy collaborating with you, whether it's here or on GVAA stuff. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
And Jim and I are both members consulting for the George the Tech team. So if you ever go to our website, there's a banner on top. Click on that. It'll take you right to the booking page for the George the Tech team. You can book either George or Jim or myself, and hopefully we can help you out.
You're like Allstate Tech. You're in good hands. So that wraps up this episode of the VO Meter.
Measuring your voiceover progress. Coming up next, we're efforting scheduling an interview with newcomer to the voiceover world, Tom Downs. He's been training with GVAA for the past couple of months, and he's actually one of my oldest friends. He's a fraternity brother from Towson State University. He reached out to me about 6 months ago and said, "Hey, I want to do this voiceover thing. I've been listening to your podcast, and I learned so much from you and Sean." At first, I was like, "Well, yeah, right," but it turns out he was serious. And then I helped him outline some next steps. One of those was to sign up for GVAA and get some coaching. And it sounds like he did that, right, Sean? He's talked to you a few times.
Absolutely. No, he's been a very avid member and really, really receptive to direction, and he's already improving quite a bit.
That's great. So once he says yes, which I think he will, if not, I'll just haze him. Oh wait, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that in 2025, like I used to. But he actually already said yes. We were messaging last night, so we're just working out the details, and we'll have that as soon as we can.
So that wraps up this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. You'll hear us then. Thanks for listening to this episode of the VO Meter. To follow along, visit us at www.vometer.com.
We'd also love to hear your comments or suggestions for the show. Or if you have a questionable gear purchase, tell us all about it on our Facebook page or on Twitter at the VO Meter.